Good morning, everybody. So for those that are joining, my name is Ben, and this is.
I'm Graham. Good morning, everyone. Nice to meet you.
We're going to do a proper kind of intro into ourselves in a few moments' time. But just to say, I think from the very off, right, Stronger has been awesome. I mean, the last few weeks has been so many great talks. Absolute kudos to the whole team that pulled this off and pulled it together. I think it's a brilliant thing and really empowering. There's such variety to talks and stuff. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be a part of what's going on. And if you've not seen other talks, jump onto the website at Stronger Network and actually kind of check them out. There's so much great content there to kind of dive back into. During this session, if you've got questions, please pop them into the Q&A, and also be sure to just say hello and where you're joining from. It'd be nice to see who's here. It might just be our mums and dads. Graham, what do you reckon?
Yeah, 100%. Probably not even that, to be honest with you. I don't think they even know that this is happening.
Graham and I used to be in a band, and we would often kind of travel the country sometimes. One time we travelled all the way to Liverpool to play the Cavern Club, and the only person to turn up was Graham's mum and dad. They travelled like 6 hours in terrible weather conditions. That's yes. There you go. That's amazing. Cool. Well, I'll tell you what. I'm going to pray really quickly, and then we'll just kind of get into stuff. So yeah, Lord God, thank you that we can gather this morning. Thank you that you're with us wherever we are, and we just pray, Lord, that through these conversations and stuff, there'll be some nuggets which will just be really useful to people, and they're figuring out where they're at and what their journey looks like. But yeah, we first of all, above all things, look to you, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Ben. I think it's worth saying at the start that the session is called the Unignorable Pull. But if you've come into this session thinking this is going to be about dating advice and how to make that unignorable pull one night, this is not that session. We are not those guys. It's worth stating that. And also that me and Ben are properly best mates, and this is probably the most that we've seen each other or chatted to each other since the start of the pandemic. So if this wanders off into just how's your kids, how's your wife, then forgive us for that. We promise it won't. We are going somewhere. So my name's Graham. I live in Bedford, which is the opposite end of the country to where Ben is in Sheffield, but we're both from Lincoln. And the way our friendship sort of started was when we were about 18 years old. We met in a field in Lincoln, a big Christian conference, and we started a band. And we had a couple of guys in the band, and then we became just me and Ben in the band as a little two-piece. And we, like Ben said, we did some gigs, and one of those gigs was at BBC Radio Lincolnshire. And that was kind of our first ever radio session. I'd never, been inside a radio studio before. And from that point on, I was absolutely gripped with what radio was. Like the idea that you could be sat in a room with a microphone and a CD player, and thousands and thousands of people could be listening to what you're playing. That's amazing. And from that day, I was hooked on this idea of radio. And from the years following, I followed that career path, which took me into work experience, doing loads of stuff for absolutely no pay, into student radio, local radio, ended up working at Six Music for a little while, and followed that journey on to start working at BBC Radio 2. And I worked with Chris Evans on the Radio 2 Breakfast Show for about, coming on for 10 years it was. 8 or 9 years. And that was wild. I started out from sort of the lowest rung of production, literally making the tea and opening the mail. And eventually, after a few years, worked my way up, and eventually was Chris Evans' producer. In the world of radio, producer is kind of the person who runs the show and runs the team. We had a brilliant team of assistant producers, and everything that came along with that was just absolutely fantastic. Meeting some of the most famous people on the planet. I sort of look back on some of these photos here, like Mo Farah and the fastest man on the planet, Usain Bolt, and then the picture on the left there is with Michael Caine, where we went to interview him in his flat in London, which was just this insanely normal moment. Like we arrived and he asked his wife to put on a cup of tea and biscuits for us. It's just so normal, but so bizarre.
Great. I don't want to throw you for a thread here, but I noticed when you were preparing these slides as well that any pictures of you with famous people tend to be people who you've got like a proper passion for. So, for example, you really love running, so hence we've got the fastest man in the world pretty much there. Like, there's no pictures of you kind of like with people that everyone else would probably go, oh,
I know.
It's quite that's an insight into, I guess, like, obviously there's a couple of times when you said Can I just grab a quick selfie?
Well, those are the people who I admire the most. You know, I've got more selfies with Paula Radcliffe than I have with like Robert Plant and Jimmy Page. You know what I mean? It's that sort of, or that they exist somewhere, but relegated into a file. By the way, as we're talking, as we're just setting this up, what would be really helpful is for the few of you that are here just to pop into the chat, and this will come in useful later on for as we form what we talk about, what your current line of work is. If you're willing and able to share that, just maybe your name and what your current sort of context is, what your current line of work is, that would really help us as we discuss things later on, if you feel willing and able to do that. So on my journey of Radio 2, there we go. Paula Radcliffe. Lo and behold. So that's us running the London Marathon with the team, all good. And we did some great stuff, man. Like, I love this job so much because the sheer size of the show. So it's the most listened to radio show in all of Europe. We had nearly 10 million listeners at one point. And just the scale of the show meant we could do incredible stuff like go and broadcast from Glastonbury. There we are with Joe Wiley and Dermot O'Leary and Chris Evans, going and doing these great shows from Glastonbury, broadcasting from the Pyramid stage itself. We went to France. That picture on the left there is just finishing a show celebrating the D-Day landings, at the anniversary of the D-Day landings, which was an incredibly moving time. And it was just a wonderful time with wonderful people, a great team. And then as Chris Evans then left Radio 2 to go and join Virgin, I was in a very, very privileged position to be asked to then launch Zoe Ball, taking over the Radio 2 Breakfast Show. And she's doing great guns on there now. She is one of the loveliest people in show business. But the opportunity as a young producer to launch a new show and the Radio 2 Breakfast Show was just like a once in a lifetime, once in a career sort of opportunity. And it was, a wonderful thing to be able to do. However, the journey started for me and Ben as two punks trying to kick out some jams in various little clubs. And, you know, mine and Ben's friendship and journey, and we'll unpack this a little bit of how we followed our journeys together. We kind of started like this, and we've tried to be faithful to what we believe and faithful to the God that we follow. And it's taken us sort of this way round, but kind of ended up following similar paths in the end. We'll come to that in a bit. But mate, these are some early gigs, man. Look at you. Comparatively, you have hair here.
Yeah, I do there. Just started shaving. I think it's is that Club Enemy in Luton or somewhere like that.
I mean, that's Luton and Lincoln, so probably not our shiniest moments. Yeah. But
there
we go. Mate, tell us a bit about your path.
Yeah, this is me hanging out with Santa. So this is totally random, doesn't it? This is a photo of the police control room in Sheffield, and it's the only photo I have of there because we weren't really meant to take photos. Christmas morning with a visit from Santa, dropping off some gifts. But yeah, I did a communications degree, and I always wanted to be a police officer. And that was the thing that I was really just felt called to, mainly because, my dad was a bobby, and he always had a new story every day, and it was this thing of being able to help people and be paid to do it, and I loved that idea. But things kind of moved forward for me, and I got an opportunity, which I will unpack a bit about this later on in terms of relationship and stuff. But basically, through contacts, an opportunity presents itself for me to go and work in Australia for a communications consultancy called AHC. And
sorry, Ben.
Sorry,
you go do it.
I'll do it. So this is me working in Melbourne. I grew a beard to try and look a little more, I don't know, is that trustworthy or not? At the time, I thought it was. And working with my wife, and we set up the office for AHC Pacific. And AHC is a communications consultancy which works predominantly with FTSE 100 and 250 firms, providing communication, internal predominantly communication support, working with great companies, Nike, Sainsbury's, M&S, Shell, BP, some big players. We had a lot of fun setting up the office in New Zealand, working and playing hard, I guess. It was just a really fun time. But off the back of that, that's us at the head office just outside Leeds, which was a beautiful place, Heathrow, to work. But off the back of that, I just felt I was ready for something which would really allow me to, I guess, fulfill some of my dreams, which was to try and run my own business. And some prophetic words about that. Again, we'll talk about that in a bit. So I set up an agency called So Shall We Talk. This is us, me, Louise, Kieran, and Stephen, a few years ago when that agency started, and providing communication support to various size businesses, which was thrilling to be able to go from police, comms consultancy to running my own thing, and it allowed me really to follow a lot of my passions, to work with people that I really respected, to do things I wanted to, learn new skills, photography, design, and yeah, it allowed me to really flourish. And somehow I think I've missed a little indicator there, but basically we went on as well to work for CPO, Christian Publishing and Outreach, which is an interesting journey, and I'll talk about that. And I'm currently head of comms for a church in Sheffield called The Well, and this is a socially distant picture, I think, of the morning of after our first ever broadcast back in March, when we stepped into the new COVID world we're in, I guess. But the journey that I've had has been really quite varied, and I've learned a lot along the way about listening to God and actually trying to step into what He's got for me, which is what we're going to try and do this morning. There's us trying to actually looking very good, considering I think we've just run the Winds Half Marathon. At other times we didn't look quite so.
Yeah, we actually look quite fresh there, mate. This session, we set that up about ourselves because we want to talk a bit about where our paths have gone and how we've tried to step in faith in our careers, lining up with our walks with God. I'll tell you in a minute that I have changed career, so I'm no longer in that radio world anymore. I'll tell you a bit about that in a second, but what we want for you to come away from this session is a feeling of empowerment, inspiration, bravery, that there might be something that is an unignorable pull. The title of the session, The Unignorable Pull, is an unignorable pull in your life to step in either a new direction or step in a continuing direction, pressing into a continuing direction, that you can see some of the practical things of how we've worked out what's our next step, what's our unignorable pull, and maybe go away with a framework of how you can start to work that out for yourself.
So Graham, just think about this. So when you, I remember when you were processing particularly some of the moves in your BBC career, from say working with Chris to Zoe and things, and you started to mention this unignorable pull, and I was like, what on earth do you literally mean by that? And it was this thing you kept coming back to as you were processing what you felt was going on in your career journey. So can you actually unpack what you really mean by the unignorable pull?
Thanks, mate. So I was working for the BBC for 10 years, and in terms of radio production, and I can say this now that I'm out of it, I wouldn't big myself up like this, but it was one of the, in terms of radio production, it was one of the biggest jobs you could do, you know, to produce the Radio 2 breakfast show. And up until about 6 months ago, that was my life. And just recently I have career changed, and in September I started to work as a church pastor, which is, if you'd mentioned that to me in my teens and 20s, I'd have run away from you very, very quickly. And it's actually hilarious that me and you are talking about this together in this session now, mate, because when I first mentioned this idea to you, this was years ago, probably 3 years ago, this sort of, Ben, I think I'm having this pull towards doing something different. And I think that different thing is being a church pastor. What's hilarious is that Ben was really against it at the time, as one of my closest friends of all time was like, I'm not sure that's such a good idea. However, here we are, Ben. We've talked about it and prayed about it a lot together, which has been really valuable. But so I'm now a church pastor, but that was not like an overnight thing. I think some of my colleagues are like, oh, the pandemic made you realize what's valuable in life, and off you go. It's like, no. The pandemic has made it a little bit harder, actually. But this has been something that has been lingering on my heart and mind for probably 3 coming on 4 years. And the unignorable pull for me was that sense of, could there be something else that I do with my life? Not something better or more worthy, but something which channels my time and energies that is going to have the maximum impact for the kingdom, the maximum gospel impact coming out of my time and energies. Now, for me, that pull was unclear at first when I first started considering that draw, what that would look like, what shape that would take, what job that would take was unclear at first. And over a period of time, it was some keys that unlocked the door. We're going to talk about those keys in a second. Some keys that unlock the door to kind of full-time church work. But that was the case for me. But for a lot of people, that unignorable pull will not lead necessarily to being a full-time church worker. I can see in the chat someone's just said that they were working in a church until last week, and now your pull, what God has in store next is going to be something new, something else other than that. Wait and see what God is pulling you towards next. Hopefully we can give you some keys to unlock a door of like what is it that God might have in store for you. That's quite exciting for you, but it doesn't necessarily result in full-time church work. So for me it was like, okay, this sense that I think God might be drawing me to something else. Not that my work now isn't valuable and has good stuff about it and good gospel impact here and now working in the BBC. In fact, there's loads of ways in which there's gospel fruit and gospel opportunity working in the BBC. But is there something else I could be doing? And at the time, I remember the first time I prayed about it, I was in St. Pancras train station, walking from the Radio 2 studios to get my train home. And I had this picture in my mind's eye that I believe was planted there by God, and it didn't go away every time I prayed about it. And the picture was this: it was two hands, and one was like a hand like that, and one was a hand like that. And I felt God was saying that, like, I want you to know that there's a pull. This hand represented like a pull. I'm drawing you somewhere else. I am leading you somewhere else. I'm pulling you somewhere else. But also there's a stop sign hand. Like it's not yet. There's some. I need you to stay where you are at the minute. There's some stuff that I want you to experience and learn. There's some stuff I want you to do where you are. I want you to know that there's a pull. But there's also a stop sign for now. Maybe you've experienced that for yourself. This idea that this is going somewhere. I think there's something else for me to do, but it's not quite yet. And that picture stayed with me for probably a year and a half to 2 years. And then as I continued to pray, every time I prayed about it, continued to pray, this hand went away, and I was left with like, right, now's the time. And so that was the pull. And so if we can put those slides back up of, this is the keys. I mentioned the keys to the door a minute ago of like, how do you figure out what your unignorable pull is? How do you figure out where to go next? It's going to have some impact. How do you line up everything that you're about with everything that God's about? And live in that kind of slipstream. And these are the three keys that I've heard of before, and kind of I've found true in my experience. 3 keys to figure out how to unlock a door. And the first one is your affinity. Your affinity for the actual thing that you want to do. Do you like doing this thing? It could be the world of music or art, and I'm seeing people in social care and design and the health world. Do I actually have an affinity to do this thing? For me, it's talking to people about Jesus who don't know about Jesus yet in my evangelism role. And I've got to tell you that speak about affinity. I have a real affinity to do that. Do you have affinity to preach and to communicate? Do you actually desire? Do you like doing this thing? The second key is the ability. Do you have the ability to do it? You might like doing it. You might have the desire to do it with the affinity, but do you actually have the ability to do it? Have you got the skills? You might have the affinity and the desire to be the next rock musician, guitarist on Glastonbury stage, but have you got the ability to bang out a guitar solo? That's another question, isn't it? Ben, I know you've got the ability and the affinity, my friend.
I used it.
So there's the desire, the ability, the actual skills. Can you actually do this thing? And then the third key is the opportunity. Is someone actually handing you an opportunity to practice these things? So, for example, let's take preaching as an example. You might desire to communicate. You might, I really want to speak into people's lives. Have you got the skills to craft a talk and to deliver a talk with conviction and that moves people? But the third key is like, is someone actually giving you platform to do that? Is someone actually giving you the opportunity to do it? There's loads of different examples you'll be able to identify in your own line of work where these things line up. and create your sweet spot in the middle there. That's what we call our sweet spot, hopefully, where your affinity for a thing, like your desire to do it, your ability, your actual skills to do it, and the opportunity to then go and practice it, all line up. And for me, in my experience, that have been 3 keys that have lined up. Now, in my example, the affinity was there early on. Like, I think I want to make a change of career. I think I want to go and do something in the Christian world. I don't quite know what that is. Do I have the ability? Well, some people at church gave me the opportunity to sort of test out a few giftings and a few skills on a sort of a low level. Abilities are things that you can learn. You can learn a skill and build on that, and that will progress and improve all the time. But then over a longer period of time, it was like, okay, someone then gave the opportunity to go full time with it. Someone put some funding in place, which allowed me to retrain and to come out of my old job. I realize that's a very privileged position. Not everyone's in that. It might just be simply that someone asks you to talk at an event. Or it might just be someone asks you to design a project for them, or whatever it is. There's the opportunity. But when those 3 keys come together, those might be clues and indicators that God is putting a new unignorable pull on your heart.
Mate, that's absolute gold. I'm glad that all our conversations about career changes and stuff don't involve slides. Yeah. So what I mean by that is that it's interesting to see you kind of actually properly unpack a process post those discussions you would have had with other friends and family and stuff as well. And you mentioned before doing that I was opposed your earlier stuff, and I think what's interesting is when you look at someone who's in a job that you think, oh, that must be a really cool job, or really thriving in an area, clearly really enjoying it, and great people, great rewards, both in terms of career satisfaction and and making sure you're getting paid and all those types of things. To do that sudden, like a big shift and things, I think there's a real thing here, isn't there, about unpacking and processing that journey and what that actually looks like. Because I remember when you told me, when you were looking at it, I was thinking, have you walked out, the fullness of what God's got for you in that role at the BBC? We knew that you were having some great relational elements and stuff, and be able to be a real voice of peace into situations and things. And that transitional thing, like, is probably quite dangerous if it's a flippant move. But taking that time to really process it, and just to unpack something else you just said then about the privileged position of being in having some funding to help you take your move right now. Relationship's so important, isn't it? Like, I don't know about you. I think, well, this is definitely the case for you. You've been able to partly transition because people have seen those qualities, you've demonstrated them, you've pursued them, and also there's been relationship which has allowed doors to open. Speaking for myself, and I'm going to present a question to you off the back of this. That I grew up with a mindset of degree, apply degree to said job, do said job, retire. That was quite an old school mindset, but that's what I had. And it was probably about 3 or 4 years into my working career that suddenly realized that so much is built around relationship, and actually being kind of really, it's blown my mind since, about every job opportunity I've had, I think in the last 10 years since, has been actually out of relationship, rather than there's been a formal interview process, no doubt, somewhere on the lines, but there's been a relational aspect of things happening and stepping into the passions that are upon us. And I guess one thing that I know, knowing you, I know you've always had a heartbeat for Jesus, and you've served in youth teams, and you've done weekly, what you call them, cell groups or house groups or whatever and stuff, as well as in your spare time. So when and how did the surge of your passion for that overtake your passion for your career to actually kind of go, no, this is the pool that I'm going to run with? Because I think for people asking questions about what their passion is like, is there a tipping point on that seesaw when it's like, I need to get off this train and get aboard this next thing?
I think that to try and come up with a clinical, logical point at which it was like, yeah, this is definitely a thing to do, in a way, I'm still not really sure. Do you know what I mean? There isn't really a clinical, logical point at which that happened. You're absolutely right about relationships. So And I'm very conscious as well. This is not a talk about, hey, do you think God's calling you to be a church worker? Like, that's not that. It's asking the question of like, what is God drawing me towards, even within my own business now? Those of you who are graphic designers and working as therapists, and people who are, clinical scientists. Man, that's incredible. That's so outside of what I'm like able to do in my head. What is God drawing me towards in that context? So is God pulling me towards being an evangelist in my workplace? Okay, well, how do I follow those steps to do that? Or is God calling me to do something with my spare time? Am I being pulled towards dropping down to 4 days a week, full time, and 1 day a week? I don't know. But this is not this thing about being pulled into ministry work. The thing about relationships is really important, Ben, because you're right. You were someone who was not all for this at first, mate. I'm so blessed that right now you are one of my biggest advocates for what I've stepped out into. But at first, and this is why relationships are so important, that for most people, if you say you're going to go and do something that a bit adventurous and different, and something that most people probably wouldn't see coming, I think a lot of people go, oh, cool, great, man, I like, go for it, enjoy. But to have the quality and depth of a friendship to go, I mean, good for you, I'm with you, but also, have you thought about this, and this? Have you thought about the downsides of leaving your job? Have you thought about the downsides of going down to 4 days a week? Have you thought about what impact you're having actually in your current situation? And there was only you and one other close mate who said that, Ben. And it really gave me and my wife pause, and cause to think, okay, maybe in BBC world, I am having real gospel impact. And that's true, man. Like, I was able to shape the way our little team worked, and I was responsible for some stuff that went on the air or didn't go on the air, that you think, okay, yeah, then there's kingdom impact and kingdom value in all the work we could be doing. We could be producing massive radio shows. We could be stacking shelves at Sainsbury's. We could be cleaning toilets in a community centre. We could be being faithful with our legal firm or our accountancy job. And I'm going to mention a book in a minute which talks about a lot of this stuff, a book by Tim Keller, that talks about, like, how am I faithful to that pull, that calling of who God's called me to just be in the workplace, but allowing people to speak into it, who have seen you in that context. So getting back to the relationships, you need people around you who will be close enough to be able to challenge you on your decisions and your choices, but also people who are able to speak into your life, who have seen you potentially in action in that area. So, for example, for me, I needed people to give me feedback on, like, do you think this ministry thing is a good idea? Like, am I cut out for that? And for some people, you'd say, yeah, brilliant. And for some people to say, not so sure. Maybe people will say that for the next 30 years about me. That's fine. But yeah, to be able to invite people in, either prophetically or on a mentorship level, to go, do you actually think this is working? Are my keys lining up here? My affinity is there. Is my ability there? Are you able to give me opportunity? Are those three things lining up? Is vital, Ben. Have you found that, mate? When you went from, well, not just from job to job, but from country to country. You're now working in a church in a comms role, but you were in Australia in a bit working in finance. Like, have you had people speak into your life and your various situations?
I have, yeah, and I guess there's a few different kind of mantles that I guess me and my wife have had, which has always been about looking for the opportunity when doors open, and also knowing, trying to process how and when to surrender stuff, and trusting in the next thing. And when I left the police and moved into the comms consultancy role, one of the amazing things, that was it, 80 odd staff there. The managing director was a Christian, and he saw stuff in me which I didn't have. I went from working in a police control room to 4 weeks later presenting to CEOs of billionaire hedge funds and stuff in Australia. And no one in their right mind would just do that. But he saw, I guess, qualities in me, and as a Christian had faith as well as part of a prayer journey, that we could actually be risked with doing this. So I think as part of that, we, for the first time ever, when Louise, my wife, and I joined AHC, started to bring in our faith journey with our career journey. And they had a counselor work for the organization, a retired minister, so you could speak to him in confidence and actually pray through stuff, which is an incredible position to be in. And obviously not many organizations, businesses are going to have that, but the principles can exist in any framework. Having somebody that you trust who's got a background, walked out, history of actually being able to be a solid foundation of advice, and actually kind of processing some things with them. And this guy, John, was incredible at helping us figure stuff out and weigh things. And it was a significant thing for me to leave the police. That was like my burning desire to kind of be a Bobby. But I also had this desire about traveling the world and doing those types of things. And I guess my first experience of kind of prophecy and prophetic words and stuff lining up with actually a journey I was walking happened around that time as well. And if you're someone who believes in prayer and prophecy, you'll know what I'm talking about. For those that's a new thing to, then I'll just talk about that for a second. But I'd actually gone through a court case at the police, so I was off work for a year and a half, and it was quite chaotic. Graham will testify to that. He was there in the courtroom. Effectively, I was accused of trying to get a police officer off a speeding ticket, something I didn't do, and he did ultimately do what he was accused of, and we were trialed at the same time. Me as his co-accused, he was guilty and got his time. And I had to prove that I wasn't actually part of what was going on. And it was a horrible experience. One of my biggest things is I hate being falsely accused of stuff. And it's like the enemy knew like that would be a horrible thing for me to go through. And it was. But basically through that and being found innocent and returned to work, and the apologies I got and the kind of redemptive elements of that was the words around being blessings tenfold and to come your way. And I had a prophetic word specifically about this. I was dragging a cart up a mountainside, and it was going to be cut off, and I was going to be free, and I'd be stepping into business and stuff. And at the time, I was like, I don't want to work in business. That's not my cup of tea. And less than a year later, I was sat in this boardroom, been offered this job, being told by the CEO, one day I can see you guys running your own business. And I thought, again, this isn't my thing. Little did I know that then literally 4 years later, having learned so much about setting up a business by setting one up in Australia, and being given the keys to that I was doing that myself. And that ultimately, that whole journey was kind of going, right, God, what have you got for us? Let's just be open to things, just being open to conversations, being open to people speaking into what's going on, us finding out what actually does drive us. And I realized I started watching around that time Dragon's Den, and I started getting really excited by watching about the pitches, and I just became, this is so exciting, and I got a passion for doing that, and end up and then I end up starting my business and things. And I think journeying stuff out in terms of kind of coming back to the kind of key conversations and stuff, and processing it with others is so important, because you do need people to tell you that, okay, yeah, I believe you can do that, but you're going to have to do this and this really to equip yourself to get in there, and just to stop, check where you are, because we can become, can't we, quite complacent, I guess. And if you're a type of person that likes change, like I really enjoy change, I want to make sure that I'm not doing it for the sake of my personality type, but that it's generally part of the journey that I'm on. And
just thinking what you said there, and a bit of that part of your story, and I think about those circles, those three things that kind of fit together. For you, actually, the opportunity was given to you before the affinity was there. So someone recognized your ability to do something and said, I think you could be a great business leader and business beginner. I think you've got ability to do that, and I want to give you opportunity to do it. And you at first were like, no way, I do not have the desire to do that. So actually those circles were a bit more of a dance for you.
Yeah, man, totally. And I think, if you take major business leaders, like big successful entrepreneurs, often you'll hear stories of whereby they've been asked by somebody, can you do this for me? And the answer, skill-wise from them is totally not. But presented with the opportunity, they'll go, right, I'm going to go and do everything I can to learn, get the people around me to be able to deliver on that thing. So I think there's, I do think that example is totally bang on, but the order of it, I guess, can fluctuate. That you can grow in ability, and we live in an age, don't we, where you can more than ever connect with others and learn in your own time to do stuff. So, for example, running my digital agency, again, we started out, I knew a lot about social media, and it was social media marketing. But straight off, I was getting people saying, my brand's terrible, and I need a website, and I need a video. I don't know how to make any of those things. In my mind, I could think about how to do them. But thanks to the power of YouTube, I jumped on and I did loads of Photoshop tutorials in my evenings, and I learned how to do web design, and I learned how to do these things and apply it and actually fulfill things. So we, you or I, if we wanted to have, we can, in our spare time, lunch breaks, whatever, jump onto these networks, learn, grow in ability, because I think seeing stuff as that bigger picture as well is so important. Like Graham, like I know that for you, like again, pre-radio and stuff, you did, memory serves me right, you did at least 1 year out working on like a youth team. And I think and that was a time when you were really kind of going, you had a passion for radio, but which way do you kind of take this? Like, I think there was a time when you even were looking into teaching.
Yeah, a primary school teacher. What a nightmare that would have been. Yeah, there was a little period where I was trying to figure out what it was. This was sort of around the age of 20, 21 of saying, is it teaching? Is it music? Is it media? Don't know. And just pushing it a few doors until one of them stuck. Now, that was, again, a time in life where I didn't have loads of financial and family commitments. And so I think people need to maybe a bit more focused depending on what stage of their life they're at. You can't just take a year to push a load of doors and work for no money. I think that as I was thinking about what you were saying there, mate, the first question is not what has God called me to do, but who has God called me to be? And as you were talking there, it was like, okay, who at core has God made me, and what is he pulling me towards being? And for me, and this will take different shapes for different people, for me, it's like, I think that my core purpose for being here is to tell as many people as possible about Jesus who don't already know about him. That at core, like that kind of word evangelism, like is a bit, but to tell as many people who don't know about Jesus. And so the outworking of that comes into, what do I do from here? Now, for some people, it might be, I want to make a difference in the world through design. Or I want to change people's lives through therapy, and do it in a kingdom shape. Or it might be that I want to use my legal prowess to be a voice for the voiceless. I want to use my business nous, my business skills, my financial abilities to really bless a church with shaping up its finances and making it more entrepreneurial. But who has God called you to be? What is that pull on the core of who you are? And then let it outwork. And again, so for me, like if I want as many people as possible to know about Jesus who don't already know about Jesus, actually, you could argue that staying in my workplace at the BBC would have, like, evangelistically, I've never been surrounded by so many people who don't know Jesus on a day-to-day level. And now I work in a church where everyone's a Christian. Like, oh, what an idiot! Like I said, there's still the possibility that I've got this whole career change thing wrong. But for me, that was the I guess you might say that we're going back to that tipping point of like, what made you change? For me, it was that there's no calculation for this, but it was like, right, I know that I want to make my life about telling people about Jesus. I genuinely believe that in a full-time church context, I'll be freed and released to do as much of that as possible. That yes, I can have influence with the people that I'm in at the BBC, and some people who might not be reached otherwise. But I think my capacity, my times, my energies, this for me can't just be, I'm a bit of an all or nothing kind of person. This can't just be in my evenings and weekends. Actually, I need to be free to make this everything that I give myself to. Again, not everyone in that position. I just mentioned this book again. This is a book by Tim Keller. Basically, anything by Tim Keller is absolute gold. But this one is called Every Good Endeavor. And in it, he argues that exact thing. Like, figure out who it is that God's called you to be, and then live it in your existing workplace. See the value of your work with kingdom lenses on. in whatever sphere you are in, and it's not just about telling people about Jesus. It's about what is God doing through me in my work. And I guess the step that this session takes that we're talking about now is that is there something else to step into that I'm being pulled towards. Now you might feel for you personally that this is something that the time is now. Actually, there's an opportunity now. Those three circles are lining up now, and I need to take some action this weekend. Even it might be like it was for me, a course of like 3 years, where I'm just going to start exploring some of this stuff, testing some out in my spare time, asking people to speak into it over a period of time. There's a couple of questions here. One says, do you think we can often put too much pressure on ourselves in over rationalizing some decisions that we almost forget to just pray and listen to what God says? I think, yeah, definitely. Because when you start thinking about either stepping into something new or changing the shape of what you're doing, you can definitely over rationalize with like, well, am I going to make money from it? What about my mortgage? What will people think of me when I leave this job or whatever it is, or change the way I work? Yeah, when you start doing sort of logical, mathematical, rational calculations on what you're doing, definitely you can way overthink it. And actually, we have a Father who has everlasting arms who we can sit in and be and totally trust. And that is a very relaxing thing that actually, if you truly and sincerely, with integrity, honor God with your decisions in or out of your workplace, his plan is to use all things for his good and his glory, and for your good as well, which is fascinating. Somehow he will, if you put your decisions in his hands, he will use them not only for his glory, but for your good. So yeah, we can over rationalize and we can forget just to pray and listen and trust.
I think I'm just thinking about applying some of the stuff you've been talking about, Graham, into individual contexts. And for me, like as a follower of Jesus, my main thing is about trying to be him to others and love well, and also giving God worth. So worship being something which isn't necessarily just musical, but being something in our every being. And I'm giving God worth through the way that I work in whatever context and job that is, and treating others in a way that's like Jesus. And I guess I was just thinking to myself, is there practical things steps to put in place? And I guess this comes down to a few things. Firstly is understanding your personality type and actually doing the classic Myers-Briggs stuff and doing kind of Belbin Strengths Finder and actually working out, there are kind of these processes are actually really good at kind of helping you figure out elements about your personality. And I've personally found that really useful to take that context and then actually apply that to, where am I actually genuinely passionate about? And right now I'm loving exploring more about photography, and that's a kind of route I can imagine myself going down more in the future in filmmaking and things. But going back to that wonderful diagram we've got of stepping into that sweet spot of, how is it ticking off those things and how we're running with those elements? I think, have you got any thoughts, Graham, around kind of, I guess if people have got questions about, well, how do I take, I love doing this certain thing. How can I move it forward from being something I think is growing with me as a passion to actually really trying that? What are we saying we need in place? Do we need a mentor? Do we need an accountability partner? Do we need any quick thoughts around that at all?
Just get started. Do something. Whatever it is that might be this shape, this experiment, just do something. You'll find out very quickly whether you enjoy it. You'll find out very quickly whether you have the ability to do it, or at least the desire to grow those abilities. And as you start to do something, anything, someone may recognize that and give you the opportunity to keep doing it or doing it further. And I realize that's quite vague, but I want to keep it vague because so many people will be in different contexts. And we're not just talking about ministry or church work. We're talking about something. Try something. And if that doesn't line up, try something else, and then get people to speak into those things, get people inside of that world. So, for example, for me, it was like some of the leaders at our church to speak into that. And then it was people outside of that world. So people like you, Ben, people I have a close enough relationship to say, what do you think? What do you think about this thing? Yeah, relationship and just giving something a try. And also that it's worth saying, me and Ben just had a phone call before that, before logging on to this. And we said, well, what about people who aren't like in their early 30s or 21 years old? Or in some ways, so I'm 33 and I've just career changed to being a church pastor. I look around me and I see people who are like, they've planted 6 churches by the age of 19 and they've like preached in America and on tour at the age of 22. And do you know what I mean? There's people who are like, oh, you're way ahead of me and you understand theology way better than I ever will. And you're 12. Do you know what I mean? It's those kind of people. It's worth saying that this pull can come anytime in your life. And it's never too late to give something a try. If God, it was Abraham who was like nearly 100 and he just pulled him in a completely new direction. God doesn't just work with the young and, agile career financial wise. God works with people. Like if you're in your whatever decade of life you're in, man, like
it's not just Abraham was 100. It's like it's good old Captain Tom.
Yeah, right. Yeah, bless him. R.I.P. Captain Tom, but had a decorated life, and then at the age of 100,
has global impact in the situation. The same, I think. Actually, age is a really interesting thing, and we can often be like, "Oh, yeah, I'm past the hill." Say people like Joe Biden, where they look whatever you think to his politics and things. The guy is served in a role. He's had a desire to become president, and now at the age of 77 or whatever he is, and I think it's happening in a lot of areas where we're seeing people actually that age is no barrier to actually pursuing what's really put upon your heart and really flowing.
Yeah. I heard someone say, even a comedian say, Joe Biden has had the most ridiculous retirement plan of all time.
True news. Simon says this in the questions, what can you say about God's economy and anxiety about money and anxieties about that? And it's interesting, like our take on money stuff, but if I may just kind of say onto that, I think there's practical things that we can do at certain stages of life, and I can only talk from my personal experience, but my wife and I, we purposely decided when we got our first house together, we would get something that we could really easily afford, that we wouldn't spend money on things that we generally didn't need, and we try and be really quite frugal with stuff and be really sensible as we can and make sacrifices for the kind of the bigger thing. And as part of that journey as well, trusting in God and actually understanding that actually from my belief is that money is his in the first place. And there's no such thing in my mind as kind of the money exists there, as it were. It's a case of it being funneled out and actually just coming to God and actually talking. We're not very good in this country talking about money and finances and stuff and giving and how we do that. But I've always found that whenever I trusted in what I felt God was saying about giving and being faithful with it, that I've seen God actually continue to provide. And if anything, like our provision just going like out the window. Lou and I, my wife, had times when we prayed. Just in our prayer time, we're like, God, we feel like, we want to bless somebody, and we'd ask, let's see if somebody comes to mind. Somebody both at the same time independently did. We gave money to that person. It turns out they were in a real place of crisis, and it, unbeknown to us, was perfectly timed. And then we found doors opening for us off the back of that. And I'm not saying that, you spend, that's necessarily always the case, but there's a key thing about trusting in him when it comes to finance. And, common sense is there to be utilized. But there is an element of the naturally kind of supernatural actually stepping out into things, which I guess a lot of our maybe friends who don't have a faith would do as part of weighing up things, actually taking those kind of faith journeys. But with all anxieties, it's a case of bringing it to the foot of the cross, isn't it? And
there's no one shape. Sorry, Ben, go on.
Yeah, no, go on.
There's no one shape, is it? You hear these stories of like, yeah, we prayed about it and we wanted a sign, and then £1,000 came through our doorstep. It's like, no, that happens, and it's amazing, and God uses that. It doesn't happen for everyone. For example, in my journey, one of the kind of the final like links in the chain to move to be a full-time pastor was like someone, a very wealthy person in our church who has remained anonymous to us all, apart from one other person in our leadership. It said, right, if it's that guy doing that job, we'll fund it for 4 years. And now that's phenomenal, but it takes certain circumstances and certain finances to be released. And I understand that's a wildly privileged position. Now, again, the person who then told me that this funding had come through said, look, gee, if you believe in signs, this is probably a sign. But there is something about that God opens up a financial door, and that may be another indicator that there is something about that pull towards that thing. However, it may be that your pull leads you to having to take a 50% pay cut to do what you think it is God's calling you to do. This does not act as a indicator necessarily. It might do, but it might be that you have to be in a place where you say, I'm so convinced that this is the direction that God's pulling me in. I'm so convinced this is the thing that God's put on my heart. Yeah. Again, not talking about church work, talking about anything. Yeah. That I may have to do this and not get paid for it.
Mate, that's totally my experience. Becoming, as grand as the title sounds, head of innovation at CPO and head of communications at the Well, both of those are charity, actually it's really, they don't have all the money that a main corporate would have. And I get a significant salary cut, but it's because I have in my heart and my being, I know that right now God has called me to use my skills in the context to help actually communicate and share and equip people and engage others and stuff. And that is a big thing. It's like, oh my goodness, the thing within me that wants to have another guitar and, actually afford to go on a holiday this year, wants me to, thinks this is completely illogical, but actually the satisfaction and the peace I have and the drive to do that. And I run a thing called the Church Comms Collective, which some of you joining us might be a part of. And the thing with the collective as well, that's a great example of where a door opening and actually kind of going, somehow lots of people have joined this movement. And I'm getting asked all the time for advice and to speak at conferences and stuff. And it's an example where doors are opening and God's clearly using me. And it's kind of like, well, if I say no, if I say yes to this, what I'm saying, no, what else am I saying? And that's been something which I think for you and I has been important. Like what are the impacts of our yeses and our nos?
Oh, that's a whole, Ben, you could have a whole hour on that. A whole hour on the wisdom of yes and no. When you say yes to something, you're implicitly saying no to something else. And when you say no to something, you're implicitly saying yes to something else. Oh, mate, stronger network. If you're listening, invite us back for next year to do a session on the implicit yes and no's. Listen, Ben, we've got 4 minutes left of people's times. In the chat, I'm just going to put our Instagram handle. So if people want to get in touch and continue the conversation or find out stuff that we're doing, whatever it is, we would love to keep in touch with people. If anybody wants to bang a question into the Q&A in the last few minutes, then that's cool. I guess we need to bring this thing into land a little bit. There's one more question that's interesting. Graham, either of us, could you encourage us on how you trusted God in your transition? Sometimes the fear of change can leave us stuck or ignoring the pull. I really think that God doesn't work with fear. Like that is not something that comes out of his being into your being. I think that if you're feeling fearful and stuck, there's God has proved himself trustworthy throughout history. You only have to open the Bible for that. You only have to look back at your own story and your brief life for that. God has proved himself trustworthy time and time again for people who have put their lives into his hands and said, do something with it. And that's been my constant prayer. And I know it's been for you the same, Ben, of like, whatever I do, God, please, will you do something with this? And I think that can get you out of a stuck point because it gives you this great relaxation of like, in God's hands, it can't really, like I've got a responsibility and I can't be just irrational and wild, but actually that I can trust that God is doing something with my something. That's how I trust God, is that I ask him, even in a broken, futile, egotistical, selfish, ridden way. I ask him to do something with what I'm doing, and I have to leave it with him and trust that that's what he's doing. Ben, again, final minutes, but that kind of, I hope that I'm going to put these slides back on. I hope that the crux of that helps people. I hope that those keys, those 3 keys, help open people's doors. I think it's worth mentioning again that we're talking about what can I give my time and energy to that is going to have the most kingdom impact. That's in church world, that's in business world, that's in the charity sector, that's in the arts and design world, that's in the scientific community. What is it that I can give my time and energy to that has the most impact for the kingdom? And hopefully some of the stuff we've talked about will equip you to think about that and process that over the long term.
Yeah, man. I think it's a great place to land, Graham. I think for me, discussing that and surrounding yourself with people that you can kind of talk through and process that stuff. Don't do this on your own. I think it's really important.
Yeah.
But as we just, I was going to pray and we'll come into land. So Lord God, we just thank you that, these things exist. We thank you for the ability you've given us. And we just pray for opportunity as well for people that are joining this right now, that you would just help people to see their opportunities and step into those things. We thank you that you're good. We thank you want the best for us. And that we would learn to trust in you and walk out of fear and not be held by a worldly standard, but see things from a kingdom and heavenly perspective. Amen.
Amen. Bless you, everyone. Love you, Ben. Good to catch up, mate. We'll have our Zoom beer at some point, I'm sure. Thank you, Stronger Network, for having us.
Yeah.
It's been a massive privilege to get to share some of the stuff and talk about it. Thank you.
Big time.